Imagine your heating stops working tonight. Not just your thermostat, everything. Your blanket from Amazon, your electric kettle, your gas stove, your Uber Eats order of hot soup. Gone. Just you, a dark room, and whatever temperature is outside. Now, how long do you think you'd last? A week maybe, if you're lucky. Here's the uncomfortable part. Your ancestors did this every single winter for 300,000 years in temperatures that would kill you in hours with zero technology, zero supermarkets, zero synthetic insulation. And they didn't just survive, they thrived. This is exactly how they did it. First, let's establish what we're actually talking about. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 21,000 years ago, global average temperatures were about 6 degrees Celsius colder than today. 6 degrees doesn't sound dramatic until you realize that's the difference between a functioning London and a London buried under a kilometer of solid ice. Vast ice sheets stretched across North America and Northern Europe. Sea levels were 120 meters lower than today, meaning Britain was physically attached to continental Europe. Siberia and Alaska were connected by a landmass that is now under the ocean. Winter temperatures in the regions where humans actually lived regularly dropped to minus 30, minus 40, sometimes minus 50 degrees Celsius. That's minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chill pushed those temperatures lower. An unclothed human being at those temperatures loses core body heat faster than they can generate it. Death from hypothermia comes within hours, sometimes less. And yet, the landscape was full of people. How? Fire. Let's start with the obvious one, because it deserves far more credit than it usually gets. Humans have been controlling fire for somewhere between 400,000 and 1 million years. The Wonderwork cave in South Africa shows traces of controlled fire use going back roughly a million years. By the time Ice Age winters became a genuine survival crisis, fire wasn't a new invention. It was ancient, deeply understood, absolutely central to everything. But here's what most people completely underestimate. Fire wasn't just warmth. It was a complete survival system doing roughly 15 different jobs simultaneously. It cooked food, which sounds simple until you understand what cooking actually does. Evolutionary biologist Richard Wrangham has argued compellingly that cooking is literally what allowed the human brain to grow as large as it did. Cooked food delivers dramatically more usable energy than raw food. We essentially traded gut tissue for brain tissue. Because cooking did the digestive work, our guts no longer needed to do. Fire made us smarter. Think about that. It kept predators away during the 16-hour winter nights. Cave lions in the Ice Age weighed up to 300 kilograms. They had absolutely no reason to be afraid of a single human being. But they backed away from fire every time. Fire hardened wooden spear tips. It dried wet clothing, which in sub-zero temperatures is the difference between comfort and death. It lit enclosed spaces during the long winter darkness. It heated the caves and shelters where people slept. And here's a detail that most people never think about. The knowledge of how to start fire, not just maintain it, but actually create it from scratch, was one of the most valuable things a person could possess. Losing your fire in a blizzard with no way to restart it was potentially a death sentence. Which means the person whose job was keeping the communal fire alive may have been among the most important members of any group. Not the biggest hunter, not the strongest fighter. The person who kept the fire going. Shelter. If you think ancient humans just wandered into any available cave and called it a night, you are about to be pleasantly surprised. Yes, caves were used, and they were genuinely excellent. A deep cave maintains a stable internal temperature year-round, typically between 10 and 13 degrees Celsius, regardless of what's happening outside. In the middle of a glacial winter, that's not warm. But combined with fire and body heat from multiple people, that is absolutely survivable. Cave walls also block wind, and in extreme cold, wind chill is almost as dangerous as temperature itself. It can push an already deadly reading into lethally dangerous territory within minutes. But caves weren't always where people needed to be. Resources moved, animals migrated, people followed. And when there was no cave available, they built. The most spectacular example of this was discovered in 1965 by a Ukrainian farmer who was digging to expand his cellar near the village of Mezirich in central Ukraine. He hit a mammoth jawbone, then another, then another. When archaeologists arrived and excavated the site, what they found stopped the academic world completely. 4 circular structures, some of the oldest human-built dwellings ever discovered, constructed almost entirely from mammoth bones and tusks. 149 mammoth bones in total. Femurs, shoulder blades, jaw bones, vertebrae, vertebrae, carefully interlocked and stacked to form walls. The frames were covered with animal hides stretched tightly over the top to create a windproof, reasonably waterproof, enclosed living space. These structures date back roughly 15,000 to 18,000 years. And here's the part that should genuinely impress you. These people had no hardware store, no timber, no nails, no concrete. What they had was an enormous dead mammoth, stone tools, and enough collective intelligence to figure out that if you arrange the curved bones like this and brace the joints like that and tie the tusks overhead as a ridge beam, you get something that stays upright and keeps the wind out. New research published in 2025 suggests that at least one of these structures was occupied for up to 429 years. Not a temporary shelter, not a seasonal camp, a home that people came back to and maintained and lived in for over 4 centuries. Inside, evidence of hearths, decorated objects, food processing areas. These were not caves people stumbled into. These were addresses, places where people raised children and told stories and waited out the long winters together. Clothing. Here's a biological fact your body doesn't advertise clearly enough. Humans are, technically speaking, naked apes. We have almost no body hair compared to every other primate on Earth. In sub-zero temperatures without insulation, a human being loses heat faster than they can generate it and dies of hypothermia within hours. The fact that you exist, that any of us exist, is almost entirely because of clothing. Scientists have found a remarkably clever way to estimate when humans first started wearing clothes regularly. They studied the evolutionary divergence between head lice and body lice. Body lice live in fabric and clothing, not directly on skin. They diverged as a separate species from head lice approximately 170,000 years ago. That's our earliest signal that humans were regularly wearing something. But what started as simple animal skin covering evolved into something that would genuinely shock a modern outdoor gear engineer. At the Sunghir burial site in Russia, about 200 kilometers east of modern Moscow, archaeologists uncovered burials dating back roughly 34,000 years. 2 children, approximately 10 and 12 years old, were buried head-to-head in a single grave. What they were wearing when they died tells us everything. More than 10,000 individually carved mammoth ivory beads were found with their remains, sewn directly into their clothing. Each bead, researchers estimate, took approximately 1 hour to make. 10,000 hours of beadwork on children's clothing. When researchers reconstructed what those garments would have looked like, what they found was a complete layered system. A close-fitting inner layer against the skin for moisture management, a middle insulating layer for warmth retention, an outer layer of tougher hide for wind and water resistance, hoods, trousers, boots. This is almost exactly the layered clothing system recommended by modern mountaineering guides. They developed it 34,000 years ago through generations of trial and error, where the people who got it wrong died and the people who got it right survived and passed the knowledge on. Food. Here's something your body doesn't tell you clearly until it's almost too late. Staying warm in extreme cold is an enormous caloric demand. Your basal metabolic rate in genuine cold can increase by 50% or more as your body desperately tries to maintain core temperature. If you're physically active on top of that, hunting, building, gathering firewood, traveling, the caloric math becomes staggering. In an Ice Age winter, running out of calories wasn't a slow process. You didn't gradually feel tired and decide to rest. You became hypothermic. Your thinking slowed. Your coordination failed, and then you died. This is why ancient humans understood something modern nutritionists are only now beginning to fully appreciate. Fat was everything. Not protein, not carbohydrates, fat. Because fat is the most calorie-dense macronutrient. More than twice the energy per gram of either protein or carbohydrate. And it's precisely what the body burns to generate heat. This is why woolly mammoths were so critical. A mature adult mammoth could weigh up to 6 tons. A significant proportion of that mass was insulating fat, under the hide, marbling through the muscle tissue. A single adult mammoth could theoretically provide somewhere around 500,000 calories. 500,000 calories from one animal. That's enough to sustain a group of 25 people for several weeks. But hunting a mammoth was not simple. These were animals that could weigh 6 times more than a modern car, with tusks capable of impaling a human being and the intelligence to defend themselves effectively. The strategies ancient humans used involved driving animals into boggy ground where they became stuck, ambushes at river crossings, coordinated group hunts using fire and noise to steer panicked animals toward prepared kill sites. And then, what do you do with 500,000 calories calories of meat when you have no refrigerator. You use the fact that the world is a refrigerator. Permafrost, permanently frozen ground, was widespread across Ice Age Eurasia. Ancient humans dug food caches directly into the permafrost, using the natural deep freeze of the earth to store meat for weeks or even months. This was not accidental. This was deliberate, sophisticated food preservation. Evidence of exactly this practice has been found at multiple Siberian and Eastern European archaeological sites. For food that couldn't be frozen, they dried it. Meat was sliced thin and dried over fires or in cold, dry air. Fat was rendered and stored in containers made from animal bladders. And ancient humans appear to have made something remarkably close to what we'd now call an energy bar, a mixture of dried pulverized meat, rendered fat, and dried berries that was calorie-dense, nutritionally complete, and could last months without spoiling. The Ice Age equivalent of a protein bar, developed 20,000 years ago. The real survival weapon. We've covered fire, shelter, clothing, and food. But all of these things share one common root, and it's the one that modern survival culture consistently underestimates: community. Ancient humans did not survive as lone individuals. The entire cultural myth of the solo survivor, the lone hero who makes fire from two wet sticks, is almost perfectly the opposite of how ancient survival actually worked. Hunter-gatherer bands typically consisted of 20 to 50 people in a core group, with broader networks connecting them to hundreds of others across a wider territory. These were not just social arrangements. They were carefully maintained survival infrastructure. In winter, when resources were scarce and the margin for error was zero, you needed specialists. The person who knew exactly how to butcher a large animal and extract maximum calories from every part, including organs, marrow, and fat deposits that most people would overlook. The person who knew which plants still had nutritious roots under a meter of snow and precisely where to find them. The elder who could remember the brutal winter 15 years ago and knew which valley had still harbored deer when everywhere else was empty. The old woman who knew every plant in a 100-kilometer radius was not a burden on the group. She was a library. She was irreplaceable. The winter months, when outdoor activity was necessarily limited, were almost certainly the primary time for knowledge transfer. Stories told around the fire were not entertainment. They were education. Survival knowledge from generations packaged into narratives that could be remembered and passed on word by word around the same fire year after year. And the psychological dimension cannot be overlooked. Long winters, confined spaces, limited food. The knowledge that people in your group might not survive to see spring.
That is a recipe for psychological collapse.
Ancient communities appear to have understood this intuitively. The evidence for ritual, for shared ceremony, for music, bone flutes dating back 40,000 years have been found in Germany, suggests deliberate, intentional cultivation of morale through the darkest months. A group that held together psychologically survived. A group that fragmented did not. These were not primitive people stumbling through a brutal world and getting lucky. They were active, intelligent, organized problem solvers, operating at the absolute edge of what biology and environment allowed. They had no synthetic insulation, no weather forecast, no emergency services, no backup plan except each other. And from the cold and the darkness and the hunger and the 16-hour nights, they built culture. They built music. They built architecture out of mammoth bones. They buried their children wearing 10,000 hours of hand-carved jewelry. They didn't just survive minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit. They found ways to be human inside it. We traded all of that for central heating and delivery apps, which is, on balance, a pretty good deal. But every once in a while, when the heating goes out on a cold night and you reach for your phone to order something warm, it's worth remembering exactly what your ancestors were doing on the same kind of night, 60,000 years before the concept of a delivery app existed.